Now, let's consider the implications of this reaction. What do you think would happen if we increase the concentration?
The reaction rate would increase, right?
The air in a modern chemistry laboratory at 3 in the morning has a specific, undeniable texture. It is recycled, sterile, and aggressively cold. There is a hum that never fully ceases, the collective drone of fume hoods, ultra-low temperature freezers, and heavy ventilation systems designed to scrub the atmosphere of chemical toxins. But there is a weight in this room that no ventilation system has the capacity to remove. You are sitting at a slate-black bench, the glow of a laptop screen reflecting in your safety goggles, casting a pale, ghostly light across your face. You are the only one left in the building. The solitude is supposed to be a sanctuary, a time for deep work, for that flow state where the mind dissolves into the mathematics. In the vacuum of the data, you are theoretically free. Science, we are told, is the great equalizer. A molecule does not care about the hand that pipettes it. Gravity pulls with the same force regardless of who drops the apple. And yet, as you sit there, listening to the building settle, you are acutely aware that the neutrality of science does not extend to the scientist. Then, a sound. The heavy clack of a magnetic lock releasing down the hall. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate boots on polished linoleum. Your heart rate creates a physiological spike that has nothing to do with the experiment in front of you. Your posture shifts instinctively. You straighten your spine. You adjust the papers on the desk to look more organized, more official. You are preparing a defense for a trial that hasn't even begun. The footsteps get closer, passing the glass window of your lab door. It is a security guard doing the nightly rounds. He shines a flashlight through the glass, the beam cutting through the dim blue ambient light. The beam catches you. For a second, you are not a researcher on the verge of a breakthrough. You are an anomaly in the landscape. You hold your breath, waiting for the tap on the glass, the demand for identification, the skepticism that asks why you are here, in this temple of knowledge, at this hour. The beam lingers for a second that feels like a century, and then moves on. The footsteps fade. You exhale. But the focus is gone. The flow state has been shattered, replaced by the crushing exhaustion of double consciousness. You have just paid a tax, a kinetic toll of adrenaline and anxiety, that your peers sleeping in their dorms did not have to pay. This is the invisible friction of the Black experience in STEM. It is not always a burning cross or a shouted slur. Often, it is the silence. It is the architectural hostility of spaces that were not built with you in mind. It is the motion sensor lights that flick off when you sit too still in the library, forcing you to wave your arms frantically in the dark just to remind the infrastructure that you exist, that you are present, that you occupy space. This frantic wave is a metaphor for your entire academic career, a constant, exhausting signal to the institution that you are here and that you belong. We often discuss the pipeline problem in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. We talk about it with the detached sterility of a plumbing issue, leaks, blockages, flow rates. But pipelines are made of steel and concrete. People are made of stories, nerves, and histories. When we reduce the exodus of brilliant Black minds from these fields to mere statistics, we commit a violence against their lived reality. We ignore the texture of the air in that lab at 3 a.m. Tonight, we are moving beyond the comforting lies of meritocracy. The prevailing narrative suggests that if you are smart enough, if you work hard enough, you will rise. It suggests that science is a pure meritocracy where excellence is the only currency. But what happens when the currency is devalued based on who holds it? What happens when the walls of the ivory tower are thick enough to muffle your voice, but transparent enough to let you see exactly what you are excluded from? We are pulling back the curtain on the unseen forces, the systemic barriers and institutional structures that actively push Black students out or prevent their entry into science and technology long before they ever fail a test. These are the phantom variables in the equation of success. They are the microaggressions that accumulate like heavy metals in the blood, toxic and slow-acting. They are the lack of mentorship that leaves you navigating a labyrinth without a map. They are the psychological toll of being the only one in the room, the representative of an entire race, carrying the burden of history while trying to solve for X. Prepare to hear the untold stories that expose the true struggles and remarkable resilience required not just to succeed, but to survive. We are investigating the dark matter of the academic universe, the invisible gravitational forces that bend the trajectory of Black lives in STEM. This is not about why Black students are failing science, it is about how science is failing Black students. The experiment is flawed. The variables are rigged. And it is time to look at the data with new eyes. When we look with these new eyes, what we see is not a sudden collision, but a slow, grinding erosion. It is rarely a singular, explosive event that drives a Black man out of the sciences. It is almost never a shouted slur or a slammed door. Those would be easy to identify, easy to rally against. Instead, the tension exists in the viscosity of the air itself. There is a philosophy of friction at play here, a resistance that defies the laws of classical mechanics because it applies only to specific bodies in motion. In physics, we learn that friction is the force resisting the relative motion of solid surfaces, fluid layers, and material elements sliding against each other. For the Black student in the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls of academia, this friction is social, historical, and deeply psychological. It is the drag coefficient of existence in a space that was not designed with your geometry in mind. Consider the morning ritual. For many peers, the walk to the lecture hall is a blank space, a time for mental rehearsal of equations or the casual drift of a daydream. But for the Black student, the journey is a recalibration of the self. Before the hand touches the cold metal of the laboratory door handle, the mask must be affixed. This is the code switch, not merely of language but of being. It is the conscious suppression of cultural signifiers, the modulation of volume, the softening of the gaze. You must enter the room not just as a student, but as a defense exhibit, proof that you belong, evidence that the affirmative action whispers are unfounded. This is the first layer of the tax. It is an energy expenditure that happens before a single variable is isolated or a single line of code is written. While your counterpart is dedicating 100% of their cognitive load to the complexity of organic chemistry, you are dedicating a significant percentage to the management of your own perception. You are solving for the problem set while simultaneously solving for your own humanity in the eyes of others. This is the double consciousness that W.E.B. Du Bois prophesied, mutated and modernized for the STEM age. It is the sensation of always looking at oneself through the eyes of a skeptical audience. In the quiet of the library, the scratch of the pen becomes a performative act. If you struggle, if you pause to think, if you stare blankly at the whiteboard, it is not interpreted as the natural process of learning. It is interpreted as a confirmation of a deficit. The privilege of the average student is the right to be mediocre, to be confused, to ask a foolish question without that foolishness being attributed to their genetic heritage. The Black student in STEM possesses no such luxury. Every error is representative. Every failure is a referendum on the race. This is the crushing weight of representation, a burden no 19-year-old should carry, yet it sits on their shoulders like the heavy, invisible atmosphere of a crushing planet. And then there is the silence. The tension is perhaps loudest in the silence. It is the silence of the study group that forms effortlessly among others, but seems to contract like a closed fist when you approach. It is the epistemic violence of being spoken over, or worse, being listened to with a polite, vacant patience that suggests your words are being endured rather than engaged. You raise your hand to offer a solution, a correct solution, elegant and precise, and it is met with a pause, a nod, and then a swift pivot to a peer who rephrases the exact same concept to a chorus of approval. This is not just a social slight, it is an academic erasure. It is a subtle gaslighting that makes you question your own grasp of reality. Did I speak? Was my microphone on? Did I formulate the thought in English? The system feeds you doubt until you begin to digest it, until it becomes part of your cellular makeup. We must understand that these institutions, these grand cathedrals of logic and reason, are haunted by their own histories. The architecture itself speaks a language of exclusion. The portraits on the walls, the names on the buildings, the authors in the footnotes, they create a lineage that implicitly suggests intellect is a monochromatic trait. To walk these halls is to walk through a gallery of ancestors that are not yours. The friction comes from the dissonance between your ambition and the environment's memory. The system is designed to replicate itself, and you are the anomaly in the algorithm. You are the outlier that the dataset tries to discard. This is why resilience is not enough. To tell a student to be resilient in the face of systemic erosion is like telling a stone to be resilient against the river. Eventually, without a change in the current, the water wins. The tension we feel is the sound of that water rushing, the relentless pressure of an institution that demands you be twice as good to be considered half as capable, stripping away your love for the subject until only the exhaustion remains. The fluorescent hum of a university library at 3 in the morning is a sound that vibrates in the teeth. It is a sterile, white noise that serves as the soundtrack to a very specific kind of solitude. For the black student in STEM, this silence is not peaceful, it is heavy. It is the weight of the straight A, a burden that goes far beyond the desire for academic validation or the promise of a high-paying career. We need to dissect what excellence actually means in these spaces. In the mainstream narrative, a high grade point average is a metric of intelligence and effort. It is a simple output for a simple input. But for the black man navigating the labyrinth of science and technology departments, the straight A is not a trophy. It is armor. It is a tactical defense mechanism deployed against a hostile environment that is perpetually waiting for a slip. When you sit in a lecture hall of 300 people and realize you are one of only 3 faces that look like yours, the physics of the room changes. The air becomes thinner. You become acutely aware that you are not just representing yourself, but an entire demographic. This is the invisible curriculum that runs parallel to the syllabus. While your peers are struggling with thermodynamics or organic chemistry, you are struggling with those subjects plus the crushing weight of representation. To get a B is to be average, and to be average as a black man in STEM is to be invisible, or worse, to confirm the silent bias that you were an admissions error, a diversity quota filler who couldn't handle the rigor. So you chase the A not out of passion, but out of necessity. It becomes the only undeniable proof of your right to exist in that room. Consider the psychological tax of this pursuit. It changes the way you engage with learning itself. Education is supposed to be a space for curiosity, a playground where failure is the precursor to discovery. In the scientific method, a failed hypothesis is just data. It is a step toward truth. But for the black student under the gaze of the institution, failure is not data. Failure is an indictment. You lose the luxury of being wrong. You stop raising your hand to ask questions because every question risks exposing a gap in your knowledge that might be interpreted as a lack of capability. You silence your own curiosity to protect your image of competence. This is the tragic irony of the defense of excellence. In striving to prove that you belong, you are forced to engage with the material in a defensive crouch, memorizing formulas to pass tests rather than internalizing concepts to shift paradigms. The joy of discovery is replaced by the anxiety of perfection. You are code-switching not just your language, but your intellect, performing a version of academic rigor that is designed to comfort the gatekeepers rather than challenge the unknown. The friction intensifies in the collaborative spaces, the labs and the study groups. Here, the straight A becomes a passport. Without it, your contributions are often talked over, your calculations double-checked with a skepticism that doesn't apply to your peers. You learn quickly that your competence is not assumed, it must be proven, repeatedly, every single day. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from having to present your credentials before you can present your ideas. You watch as mediocre ideas from others are entertained and explored, while your excellent ideas must be presented with flawless precision just to be heard. This is the unseen labor of the black student in STEM. It is the energy spent managing the comfort of others, the energy spent anticipating the stereotypes and neutralizing them before they can be weaponized against you. And when the semester ends, and the transcript arrives with that perfect 4.0, the feeling is not triumph. It is relief. It is the exhaling of a breath you didn't know you were holding. It is the reassurance that the armor held up for another few months. But armor is heavy. Wearing it day after day, semester after semester, deforms the posture of the soul. It creates a relationship with success that is rooted in trauma rather than fulfillment. You become excellent at what you do, but you are slowly hollowed out by the reason you are doing it. You are surviving the system by perfecting yourself, but the system remains unchanged, feeding off your exertion while offering nothing in return but the permission to return tomorrow and do it all again. This is the trap of the straight A. It saves you from scrutiny, but it cannot save you from the systemic isolation that made the scrutiny inevitable in the first place. If the straight A is the armor you wear to protect your intellect, the code switch is the mask you wear to protect your humanity. It happens the moment the heavy fire door of the laboratory clicks shut behind you. It is an almost biological response, a reflex honed over years of subtle conditioning. You do not just enter a room, you recalibrate your existence. The air in these high-level STEM environments feels thinner, scrubbed clean of the humidity of the outside world, and in response, you make yourself smaller, tighter, more aerodynamic. You watch yourself from the third-person perspective, a phenomenon W.E.B. Du Bois called double consciousness, but here, amidst the beakers and the blackboards, it takes on a specific, sterile precision. You are monitoring your volume, ensuring your enthusiasm is not misread as aggression. You are modulating your pitch, flattening the natural cadence of your voice into a monotone that signals objectivity. In the world of science, we are taught that data is neutral, that numbers do not lie, and that the pursuit of truth is a colorblind endeavor. But the culture of science is anything but neutral. It is a space where the default setting of professionalism is historically coded as white, male, and emotionally detached. To survive here, you must perform a silent amputation of your cultural self. You leave your history at the door. You leave your slang, your posture, your unrestrained laughter in the hallway, because inside, those things are seen as impurities in the sample. They are variables that the system cannot account for, and so the system views them as errors. Consider the group project, a staple of engineering curriculums. You are sitting around a table with 3 peers who do not look like you. The problem set is difficult, the tension is palpable. When a disagreement arises about the methodology, you feel the familiar tightening in your chest. For your peers, a debate is just a debate. They can slam their hands on the table, raise their voices in frustration, or passionately defend a wrong answer without consequence. Their passion is read as engagement, their frustration is read as rigor. But for you, the calculus is different. You know that if you raise your voice, the atmosphere in the room will shift instantly. You are not just a passionate student anymore, you become a threat. The archetypes of the outside world, the dangerous black male, the disruptive element, bleed into the sterile lab environment. So, you perform the code switch. You smile, even when you are annoyed. You phrase your corrections as questions, softening the blow of your competence so that it does not bruise the egos of those around you. You spend valuable cognitive energy, energy that should be directed toward solving the differential equation, navigating the fragile sociology of the room. This is the invisible tax. It is the processing power siphoned away from your actual work to run the simulation of a safe version of yourself. This constant act of translation is exhausting. It is a deep, marrow-level fatigue that sleep cannot touch. You are essentially working 2 jobs simultaneously. You are the scientist doing the work, and you are the PR manager for your own existence, constantly spinning your presence to be palatable to a system that was not built with you in mind. And the tragedy is that this performance works. The professors nod approvingly at your articulate explanations. The lab partners eventually relax, deciding you are one of the good ones, a phrase that carries the unspoken implication that your natural state is something bad. You succeed, but the victory is Pyrrhic. You look in the mirror in the department bathroom, the fluorescent lights humming that aggressive, headache-inducing tune, and you wonder who is staring back. The mask has been worn so tightly and for so long that it has begun to leave indentations on your soul. You begin to question if your actual self is compatible with this world of discovery. Can you be a brilliant physicist and a black man simultaneously, or does the institution demand that you choose? The code switch whispers that you can be here, but only if you are willing to be someone else. It is a survival mechanism, yes, but we must ask ourselves, What is the cost of a survival that requires the slow erasure of the self? The system claims to want diversity, but often, what it really wants is visual diversity with cultural conformity. It wants the aesthetic of difference without the friction of difference. And so, you continue to switch, flipping the unseen toggle in your brain every morning, walking the tightrope between who you are and who you must be to remain, untangling the wires of a system that demands your brilliance while fearing your being. There is a particular kind of silence that descends upon the mind when you step into a lecture hall designed for hundreds, yet find yourself to be the only one of your kind. It is not an auditory silence, for the room is often filled with the chaotic shuffling of papers, the low hum of pre-class chatter, and the electric buzz of fluorescent lights that seem to bleach the color out of everything they touch. No, this silence is internal. It is the quiet, suffocating pressure of hypervisibility. In the vast, tiered seating of a STEM lecture, where the architecture itself directs all eyes toward the singular authority of the podium, you become an anomaly in the peripheral vision of the collective. You are simultaneously the most visible person in the room and the most invisible. This is the paradox of the ghost in the classroom. You haunt these halls of academia, physically present but often intellectually unacknowledged, navigating a space where your existence is viewed as a statistical improbability rather than a standard expectation. The curriculum itself reinforces this ghostly status. You scan the textbooks, heavy with the weight of centuries of discovery, and you see names like Newton, Darwin, Einstein, and Bohr. The lineage of genius is presented as an unbroken chain of European ancestry, a genealogy of intellect that seemingly has no branch for you. When you look at the portraits lining the department hallways, the eyes of dead men stare back, and in their gaze, you find no reflection of your own potential. This absence is not neutral, it is an active signal. It whispers that science is a heritage you are visiting, not an inheritance you possess. To be a black man in this environment is to constantly battle the assumption that you are a guest in the house of reason, liable to be asked for your credentials at any moment. And so, the ghosting process begins. It manifests in the way you hesitate before raising your hand. In any other context, a question is simply a quest for knowledge. But here, in the thin air of the laboratory or the mathematics seminar, a question feels like a confession of inadequacy. You calculate the risk before you speak. If you ask something basic, do you confirm the silent suspicion that you were an admissions error? If you make a mistake, is it just your mistake, or does it become a verdict on your entire race? This is the crushing weight of representation, the burden of carrying a whole people on your back while trying to balance complex equations in your head. The cognitive load is immense. While your peers are dedicating 100% of their mental energy to understanding thermodynamics or organic chemistry, you are forced to tithe a significant portion of your focus to monitoring your own existence. You are watching yourself be watched. You are managing the ghost. This dynamic becomes most tangible in the intimacy of group work, where the systemic barriers stop being abstract concepts and become sharp, interpersonal friction. Consider the lab partner who instinctively takes the pipette from your hand, assuming you are better suited to recording the data than conducting the experiment. It is a soft violence, a subtle relegation to the role of the observer rather than the architect. They do not say you are incapable, they simply act as if your competence is a variable that has not yet been proven, while theirs is a constant that need not be tested. You are ghosted out of the Hansen experience, pushed gently but firmly toward the margins of the project. You feel the heat rising in your chest, the conflict between asserting your intelligence and avoiding the label of being aggressive. If you fight for the pipette, you are disruptive. If you yield, you are erased. It is a lose-lose scenario written into the script of the interaction before you even introduced yourself. This is the unseen curriculum. It is not listed on the syllabus, but it is graded more harshly than any exam. The systemic barrier here is not a locked door. It is a rolling fog that obscures your path and chills your resolve. It is the isolation of walking out of a brutal exam and having no one who looks like you to share the specific, cultural weight of that stress. It is the realization that to succeed, you must not only master the material but also master the art of enduring a space that was not built with your spirit in mind. The ghost in the classroom is not a phantom of your imagination, It is the residue of an exclusionary history that has not yet been fully exorcised from the walls of the institution. The silence of the laboratory at 3 in the morning is fundamentally different from the silence of a library or a cathedral. It is a mechanical silence, composed of the low-frequency hum of high-voltage equipment, the sterile breath of industrial air filtration systems, and the lonely, antiseptic blue light of a solitary computer monitor. In this space, the black student often finds themselves as the only dot of warm color in a starkly white, clinical expanse. But as we move from the external ghosts in the classroom to the internal architecture of the mind, we encounter Pillar 4, the ancestral blueprint. This beat of the story explores a frequency of the black experience in STEM that is rarely quantified by data but is felt with visceral intensity by those living it. It is the sensation of walking into a lecture hall and seeing a timeline of discovery that has been surgically altered to exclude your reflection. The curriculum itself acts as a form of soft power, a subtle psychological conditioning that frames science, mathematics, and engineering as exclusively Western inheritances, a European property that you are merely borrowing, provided you follow the rules. When you open the textbooks, the portraits of the pioneers, Newton, Darwin, Einstein, Planck, stare back with a uniform complexion, reinforcing a silent, suffocating narrative that genius has a specific genealogy. This is the systemic barrier of epistemic violence, the erasure of one's origin story in the very field they seek to master. The struggle, then, is not just intellectual, it is existential. You are not just learning thermodynamics. You are constantly having to write yourself into a history that has actively tried to edit you out. The energy required to maintain this mental fortification is the unseen tax levied on black excellence. But beneath this exclusionary surface lies the untold story of the blueprint. Consider the psychological weight of being the first, or the only. This is not merely a statistical anomaly to be celebrated in a diversity pamphlet, it is a heavy mantle worn on narrow shoulders. You are walking through the hallowed halls of academia carrying the deferred dreams of entire generations. You are the wildest dream of the grandmother who scrubbed floors so you could study physics, the vindication of the grandfather who was denied the right to read so you could write code. This is the ancestral blueprint, a driving force that is both a source of infinite, renewable power and a crushing, terrifying burden. In the quiet moments of doubt, when the data doesn't make sense and the imposter syndrome flares like a fever in the blood, the student is not just fighting for a passing grade. He is fighting to validate the sacrifices of a lineage that survived the unspeakable so that he could stand in this sterile room. The system, however, is blind to this. It sees only a student struggling with a problem set, not a soul wrestling with history. It interprets silence as confusion, not as the heavy contemplation of a mind operating under the sheer weight of double consciousness. The counterstory we must tell reveals that this resilience is not accidental, it is engineered. The ability to navigate hostile environments, to decode complex systems of oppression, to innovate with limited resources, these are not just survival skills, they are the foundational traits of a brilliant scientist. The very history of black survival in America is a masterclass in STEM. It required architectural genius to build safe spaces in a burning world, chemical mastery to heal bodies without access to hospitals, and mathematical precision to navigate the economics of survival. This knowledge is not cited in peer-reviewed journals, but it is encoded in the DNA of the student. The systemic failure lies in the academy's inability to recognize this alternative form of literacy. The institution demands that you strip away your cultural identity to wear the lab coat, pretending that true objectivity requires the erasure of the self. But the most profound breakthroughs often come when the self is fully present. The untold story here is that black students are not entering STEM empty-handed. They are bringing a distinct, resilient cognitive architecture that the field desperately needs but arrogantly rejects. As you stare at the glowing cursor on the screen, surrounded by the weight of an exclusionary history, you realize that the friction you feel is the grinding of tectonic plates, the immovable force of the institution meeting the unstoppable force of your ancestry. The blueprint is there, hidden beneath the surface, waiting to be read not by the professors who doubt you, but by the spirit within you that knows you belong. The sun rises over the concrete brutalism of the engineering quad, casting long, geometric shadows across the pavement. It is the same sun that rose on your first day here, yet the quality of the light feels different. It is no longer an interrogation lamp exposing your perceived inadequacies, but a spotlight illuminating your survival. We have spent this journey dissecting the invisible anatomy of the institution, tracing the veins of systemic exclusion and the nerves of psychological warfare. We have looked beyond the classroom, beyond the sterile metrics of grades and retention rates, to uncover the human cost of entering a world that was mapped by men who did not believe you possessed the capacity to read the legend. The final lesson, therefore, is not about chemistry, or physics, or the elegance of code. It is about the physics of the soul. It is about the law of conservation of energy, how you managed to sustain your momentum when friction was applied from every direction. The narrative we are often sold is one of assimilation. We are told that to succeed in STEM, one must shed the messy, subjective weight of identity and ascend to a plane of pure, objective reason. But the untold story you have lived proves that this is a lie. You did not survive by becoming less black. You survived by understanding that your blackness was the very engine of your innovation. The resilience we celebrate is often romanticized, painted as a noble struggle, but let us be honest about the scar tissue. Resilience is simply the ability to return to your original shape after being bent, compressed, and stretched. Yet, in this context, you do not return to your original shape. You return harder, denser. Like carbon pressurized into diamond, the systemic weight that sought to crush you has instead refined you into something unbreakable. This is the paradoxical gift of the barrier. The unseen forces we pulled back the curtain on, the microaggressions, the isolation, the assumption of incompetence, they were designed to filter you out. But filters also concentrate the solution. By remaining, by occupying space in the lab, in the lecture hall, in the boardroom, you have become the concentrated essence of excellence that the system feared. You realize now that the imposter syndrome you battled was never a defect in your character. It was a rational response to an irrational environment. The feeling of not belonging was accurate because the space was not built for you. But the act of staying is an act of renovation. Every time a black student solves a differential equation, every time a black researcher publishes a paper, every time a black engineer signs off on a blueprint, they are not just doing a job. They are retrofitting the architecture of the future. They are proving that the universal language of mathematics and science is truly universal, belonging to no single race or history. As you walk away from the heavy oak doors of the department, carrying the weight of your degree or your career, you carry something else, too. You carry the silence of the ones who were pushed out. You carry the ghosts of the potential that was strangled by the pipeline. This is why the victory feels solemn. It is a solitary summit, but looking back down the mountain, you see the path you cleared. The brambles are cut back. The foothold is carved. The next climber will still face the wind, they will still feel the cold, but they will see your footprints in the snow, and they will know that the summit is reachable. This is the resonance of your journey. It echoes backward to the ancestors who navigated by the stars without telescopes, and it echoes forward to the children who will build starships because they saw you refuse to lower your gaze. The system is vast, ancient, and stubborn. It changes slowly, grinding like tectonic plates. But you are the water that seeps into its cracks. You are the freeze and the thaw that expands and breaks the stone. The untold story is no longer a tragedy of exclusion. It is an origin story of a new kind of scientist, one who brings the fullness of their humanity into the sterile room, who knows that true objectivity does not require the erasure of the self, but the courage to see the world exactly as it is, and the audacity to dream of what it could be. You are the variable that changes the equation, and the result is infinite.